Welcome, everyone. Um, my name is Jocelyn Frederick. I'm the current chair of the Global Initiatives Committee, as well as interim president for the Land Economics Foundation. And we're welcoming you to our webinar today, City of Thoughts, How Artificial Intelligence Changing the World. As a background, LAI is an honorary society providing global platform for distinguished practitioners in the field of land economics. And as a part of that, LEF is our foundation that is supporting academic research as well as research into public projects. What you'll see coming up here is we do have a land economics gathering middle of October. Hopefully many of you have already signed up for this wonderful event. And if you have not, but are still interested in attending events, we do have our semi-Q regional events that are going on right now. It started in Florida at the end of February, and it's continuing up the mid-Atlantic coast through, obviously, the through the middle of this year. What you'll see on the next slide are some LinkedIn pages for members, as well as some information as to how you can access our website. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Justin, as well as Max, for the presentation.
Hey, well, thank you, Jocelyn, and thank you as well to Sheila Novak, our LAI Executive Director, and all of the leadership of LAI and LEF, Land Economics Foundation, for making this all possible. So, thank you. And thank you all for coming. We are really happy to be here. So my name is Justin Hollander, and I teach urban planning at Tufts University, which is just outside of Boston. And I'm also a LAI member in the Boston chapter. And I'm happy to be joined by longtime collaborator, Maxwell Hart, and he is a professor at Queen's University in Canada. And he and I have actually been working together through funded research through LEF for actually quite a number of years with another collaborator, Ruth Potts. And she teaches at Cardiff University, and she actually was not able to be with us today, but she's been kind of behind the scenes, not on the front of the webinar camera, but has been part of this ongoing research, which we're really, really delighted to be able to collaborate with LAI and LEF with making that happen. I do want to also just actually put down the names of, this has not just been the three of us, Max, Ruth, and I. We've collaborated with many, many of our students over the years. And I'm just putting into the chat of the names of all of the many, many students of ours who have been able to make what you're about to see and learn about possible. So definitely want to acknowledge them. So Max, you had some slides. You want to open those up? Thank you. So AI has been something that people have been talking about for a long time. So we're going to kind of, yeah, you can go to the next slide. We're going to kind of talk about, well, what does it mean for the real estate development and urban planning professions when you do community engagement? How does AI have an impact on that? Because so much of that is happening online in online spaces, whether we're talking about virtual surveys, virtual public meetings, Zoom meetings, websites where community members are asked to engage. What does it mean when these AI and social media bots are really taking over so much of the internet? And so there's a lot of conversation that it happens when a new project is being proposed. I'm sure all of you can think of in your own neighborhood or your own community, particularly a bigger project, maybe a stadium or office building or something big that's coming up, and everyone's talking about it. They're also talking about it online. And how are these AI-powered bots impacting those conversations? And so that's really the focus for today. So again, I mentioned that we were very fortunate and appreciative of the support of the Land Economics Foundation. They've supported us through two other previous projects that have built up to where we are now. So the first one, we tried to just really understand, are there bots actually operating at all in these environments where large real estate development projects are being considered for approval? And we looked at 21 different projects, and across them, between 10 and 50% of all posts were by bots. And that's over the course of about 40,000 tweets. So we presented this research to one of these webinars and got really good supportive feedback. But the message was, let's look more closely. Let's do some more analysis. Let's look at some detailed case studies and try to unpack some of these findings a little bit more. So we were able to successfully write a proposal that kind of followed up on these projects that you see in front of you, which were all over the United States, and tried to understand a more detailed level kind of what was happening, at least on some of them. And I have another slide here just kind of give you a flavor. We're not looking at tiny little, an addition to a home or even like a triple decker, a multifamily. We really wanted to focus on really big projects, and so trying to understand the conversations that are happening online, what role these bots are playing, and how that's impacting the outcomes. So I will now turn it over to Max to start us off.
Sure, thanks so much. So we ran a couple different studies within this project with a lot of student support, as Justin mentioned, and one of them that I found really interesting that a student and I led was wondering about what happens in the sphere of this conversation. Are bots coming in and fostering new debates essentially, or are we just seeing a bit of an echo chamber effect where we see the same messages being passed around? So to do this, we took a pretty novel approach. Led by Justin, the team developed our own bot. So Urbanist Uma, who you can see in the picture in the top left. So this is, according to her description, your friendly guru on urban planning and ideas about the future of cities in Somerville, the Brooklyn of Greater Boston. And so that also highlights that she's affiliated with Tufts. So what Uma was able to do was we had a few actions programmed in. So she could favorite, she could retweet, and she could quote tweets, and she could follow accounts. And then she also could create content. So this changed over time. So on the right, you see early days of Uma's existence. So she says, "You've got to see this, a bowl of soup." But over time, so that Uma became more of an expert and more self-actualized. And so eventually you get to tweets like this that say, I believe it will be an incredible success for the rail system. The project will consume enough of LA traffic to acquire about 50 stations and bring the total to about 1,100. So she's retweeting this article from Planetizen about environmental review of light rail, and she's adding her own content and her own thoughts. I believe. So we call this the self-actualized period of urbanist Uma. So she can also have captions associated with images. So she was able to be a presence on this is on Twitter specifically. So what we did in this study or analysis of Uma is we created two data sets of her activity. The first was looking at her tweets. And so in the end, after cleaning the data, she had 346 tweets that ran from about March 2020 to March 2022. So not on purpose, but very, very closely aligned with the pandemic. And we also had an inventory of all of Uma's followers, including their bio info. So we could actually dig into, who are the people that are listening to her or talking. So what we concluded was that Uma did have an audience. It wasn't as direct as we expected. So Uma was not the most popular in terms of her tweets, in terms of likes. So only 6 likes ever on Uma's tweets. But the interesting thing is when you dug a little bit deeper and you saw the impressions they made, the number of views that they had, we saw that her tweets were viewed tens of thousands of times. And then her profile was viewed almost 10,000 times. So either people or bots were actively reading what Uma was posting and actively going to her profile page as well. we dug further into her followers. We saw that we did see some mirroring there in terms of our thematic analysis. So we coded them based on a range of codes. And one of them was around what their profession or the main aspect of their bio was. And we found that over half of her followers were coded as planning and development and or academic and research. So this wasn't overly surprising, as her name is Uma Nastuma, and she has a Tufts affiliation in there, but still kind of interesting to see. What was more interesting is when we got into the details of those bios, we did see people, profiles that were mostly apolitical or neutral, but we also saw some that kind of swung quite liberal and quite conservative in terms of ideology. So we saw that there was a little bit of mixture in here in a way. So there was an interest based, so in terms of plan development, but also a wider range than we might have expected. So what did we learn from Uma? One, it's what for even before one, it's possible. We created a bot and that it was possible for a planning focused social bot to generate a following. Second, we saw that Uma's following was an occupational echo chamber. So we realized this is an opportunity to cut across these ideological divides within an occupation, but also still a challenge to cut across disciplinary silos. So to get outside of the kind of urban and planning conversations. One thing that was really interesting that, when we really were taking this all in, is that Uma could be really, really effective because of her slow growth. So, because of her development over time, it wasn't an instantaneous success. Even the 6 likes total, it was kind of a slow growth situation at best. But that really is quite interesting because a lot of bots are quickly made, quickly used. You can see it. You see a lot of comments a day after an account was made, it kind of gives it away. So we realized that Uma's slow growth and lack of engagement could actually be a strategy to legitimize a bot account for nefarious purposes or other purposes. But to make it look not like a bot, a slow growth and a slight change could actually be a specific strategy. Lastly, we found that Uma taught us that she could be effective, bots could be effective in providing clear and consistent messaging for planning authorities across several social media platforms. So people did read her message, people did come to see her profile. So there is an opportunity there to think about how social bots can be used with this in mind. So continuing in that, so, we were thinking about, as Justin mentioned, how do we identify if there are bots? And there's different tools for it. But as we've seen the advance of these different social media AI kind of generated bot platforms, we were curious about how good they were about identifying each other or the presence of other bots. So what we did here is in April 2025, we asked 3 chatbots, so ChatGTP, Cloud, and Llama, about 4 of the real estate developments that had been part of our study. So this was the Centennial Yards in Atlanta, One Congress in Boston, Transbay in San Francisco, and Amazon HQ2 in Arlington. So these are the questions we asked them. We asked them, are they familiar with this development? What are the major themes around it online? Where were these debates happening? Who were the main actors advocating for and against the project? Were automated accounts or bots involved in any of these online debates? And in their opinion, did these bots influence the outcome of the project? So a couple of things were interesting about this is one, we could kind of get an overview of what's happening online according to large language models, but also to see the differences between these bots as well. So the first thing, the bots did share similar core facts regarding development. So it didn't really matter which one you asked, they would give you the same general core details. But outside of those core details, we saw some pretty significant differences in terms of the additional information provided, the tone, and the response structure. So we found that Claude really stuck to the facts. It was very fact-based, not a lot of extra frill. Llama really leaned into the positive aspects, especially the economic potential. So they were very unlikely to offer any critiques, whereas ChatGTP included fact and economic prospects, but also provided critiques and really its own broader reflections as well, which was kind of interesting. The second thing we found here was that bots did provide comprehensive and distinct lists of development advocates and opponents. And so in terms of Claude and Llama, they gave a decent list and they kind of highlighted them. And this is where ChatGPT separated itself again. It provided investigative journalistic like positions. So it actually kind of gave more context around it and it gave some seeming insight into the debates and that with a really confident tone that felt informed and balanced and trustworthy. So we're thinking about the user who wants to know about these and what convinces them and what can actually either perpetuate echo chambers or influence how people are thinking. In terms of bot involvement, here was quite funny. So ChatGTP said yes, definitely, there's involvement. Llama said maybe, depends, I don't really know. And Cloud outside right away said no, they didn't find to be any bot involvement. So this was a bit surprising to us that they weren't consistent on this, and the reasons behind it were quite interesting. Llama in particular, their explanation was, we would said, eerily similar to our own published work on this topic. And then, so they kind of spat out our own words back at us. And then we asked it for references. It didn't provide any specific citations. So we really got to see these echo chambers in action. The work that we had done was being given back to us in a slightly different context and not being attributed to us. And so we could see this as kind of a funny moment for us to see that this our bot's involved, and it said, well, hypothetically, yes, and then gave the exact reasoning that we had given, even though in the paper we wrote that we actually did determine that bots had been involved. So it's really interesting to see how these are changing over time and what kind of information they're providing to the public, and that idea of the tone and the confidence that it comes with is a bit worrisome at times. So five takeaways. Bots generally underestimate other bots' presence and potential influence. This is kind of similar to what we found in when we talked to practitioners. Bots are not identical, so I think a lot of people think of these as just different choices, different price points. They each contained a bias, so the choice of chatbot does matter. Chatbots are inherently political. What goes in, how they work. It's a black box, but we know that it cannot be neutral. Fourth, it's important to mention that chatbots can be helpful. They really did summarize and give a lot of interesting and useful information. But of course, as the old adage goes, garbage in, garbage out. And so when we think about this, we really need to be critical. It can be helpful, but we always need to remain critical. With that, I'll pass it back to you, Justin.
Great, thanks, Max. Yeah, so he highlighted these four case studies. So before Max led this bots on bots analysis, we actually did some very kind of old-fashioned social science research by talking to humans and looking at published reports, looking at news articles, and trying to understand how these bots may or may not have played a role in these four cases. Next slide. So for each one of them, we talked to a few different people, trying to get opinions from people who are directly involved in the development of the project or the review of the project or approval, and tried to understand from them. The first really set of questions was like, to what extent was this community engagement process connected to the internet? And so they talked about online meetings, they talked about social media, and then for the Amazon headquarters, they actually did some online voting using as like a surveys as well. And so in trying to kind of assess the community engagement, there was also some variety of different modalities, but certainly neighborhood meetings was a big one. But a lot of just online engagement, a lot online community engagement. And when we asked directly to these interviewees, did you think that there were bots involved in that community engagement process that you just referenced? I mean, certainly in an in-person neighborhood meeting, I'm sure there weren't. A bot like walked into the room or something. I mean, I think everyone would notice that. But you don't notice it if it's online, as Urbanist Uma proves, right? She seems so authentic. Yeah, so in two of the cases, in one Congress and in Trans Bay, they said no, but in Centennial Yards and Amazon, the folks we talked to felt that the bots were involved. And it was for those two cases, through social media comments that kind of infiltrated the discourse and dialogue around the project, which drives public opinion and drives political decision making. And then through Amazon, they talked about emails. So ultimately, the question is, does it matter? And for Centennial Yards, the sense was that it did matter, and that the role that the bots were playing in disrupting the social media discourse was really detracting from the an authentic community dialogue that allowed space to really consider all the different perspectives. So, folks we talked to, really did say it was a problem there. And in terms of the Amazon headquarters, there was just the sense that it bothered the developers. I mean, it was a infringement upon the kind of normal workflow. It got in the way. There may have been some modest costs associated with it, but it wasn't. It didn't ruin the project. It didn't ruin any of the projects, and it certainly didn't stop. These projects all ended up getting built. Though that was a result of maybe potentially a bias in our sample selection, because we only focused on projects. The original study, the 21 projects I showed you that slide earlier, and then these all were projects that actually got built. So if we had ended up studying projects that failed, we might have been able to find more examples of where, because of the heavy influence of these bots, that the project actually got killed. But it could also be the opposite, that maybe the real estate developers are hiring marketing firms that are using these bots, and they're making sure these projects go through. So we don't know, even though we did all this like intensive, I would call it forensic analysis to like look closely at what was going on, and doing these interviews. We really still don't know 100%. That's kind of the nature of this type of research. You still don't know 100%, but there's certainly some compelling evidence that the bots did make a difference, at least in two of these cases. So because of the long-standing project that we've been doing with the LEF support, we were actually able to put this all together in a book that we are just finishing up right now, and that's going to be published by Policy Press, which is based in the UK. So we're really happy to be able to tell the story in a cohesive way, to be able to build on the kind of prior LEF supported research, and happy to share a link with this when the book actually does come out. So great. Well, thank you for joining the webinar, and really the rest of the time is available for Q&A.
Great.
So yeah, I asked Max if he can if he can moderate the questions.
Yeah.
Does that sound good?
Yeah, I mean, so the one question that's come in so far, Justin, is just talking about looking at Twitter X as a stand-in, kind of as, and really what bias does this introduce, and and then chatting about the role of continuing role of Facebook and online newspapers, for example.
Yeah, and we did choose to start using X/Twitter because it's unusual among all these different social media platforms. It makes itself available for this type of research. That's less so true now, but at least in the beginning stages of what we were doing, that data collection analysis, that is what we found. I can say though that we have in this recent version of this stage of the project that we're sharing with you now, we actually did look at quite a lot of other social media. We looked at Facebook, we looked at Reddit, and we were able to find many examples of bots, and so we kind of talk about that in the book, but. Yeah, so this is an issue with any kind of data collection. You're going to always have some sort of a bias. So that's certainly a weakness to the extent that we've leaned too much into that. I'm very excited though, because I did go through a process through the company that owns Facebook, Meta, that so I do now have access to the Meta kind of back end. So I'm hoping to be able to kind of continue to do this type of research. So at least because I agree, I think a lot of those conversations are happening definitely in these Facebook groups. So it's a great place to kind of understand a little bit better. But thank you
Yeah,
for the question.
Yeah, I think it's that one of the challenges of this research is it's so fast moving as well, right? So it's when we first made put a Urbanist Duma on Twitter, we didn't expect everything that would happen to to Twitter, let alone its renaming and everything else. So it's often going quite quickly. There's another question from Courtney asking about that bots and real estate development is a pretty narrow subset of urban planning, and asking whether we address other areas in the book. To say, I would say, I mean, we focus in on partially empirically around real estate development, but really, I think the book is more of a conversation starter about about urban planning more broadly, and I'd say, even outside of urban planning. But I think this is something as urban planners we can think about, so easily as this idea of, people bringing their friends to a town hall, and then how could this impact it. So, yeah, we dive deep into the theory, and we take this in different directions. But the empirical part is kind of centered around that real estate development. But I think we take it in a lot of more depth, I would say, and really trying to ask those big questions because there isn't a lot written about this yet. And so one of the great things about being early to that is you have a lot of room. One of the hard things is you want to spread a big message. So I think that was kind of, I don't know, Justin, you would agree with that, but that was the goals within the project.
Yeah. Yeah, that's well said. Thank you, Max.
So there's a question whether any of the projects we looked at were either public sector or municipality initiated, and I guess we could add to that, if not, how do you think that might change any perceptions or the role of bots?
Yeah, so when we started to identify those the 21 projects I identified earlier, we really wanted main criteria was that they were private sector led. Though, as you can imagine, I mean, the public sector is involved with all of them. But in order to be able to have a consistency across the cases, so that gives us the ability to be able to generalize. But yeah, to that point, certainly the public sector led projects, certainly could be impacted by bots. Another reason, just to reflect a bit, I think one of the things we wanted to do was to look at examples where there would be this adversarial relationship, and that there would be motivation on different sides to engage bots. Because in a situation where it's like a private sector led versus like there could be like a community resistance to that, and that can certainly happen in the public, but there isn't, it's not quite such a polarity. So that was kind of the thinking, but I think that what we found makes me unequivocal. There are going to be bots involved in any kind of, even in a public sector led redevelopment or major project.
Yeah, and this is great, Justin. This also speaks to Michael's question. I'll get back to the other ones. I'm jumping out of order, but asking about the project selection, and also and suggesting that interested in the anecdotes around high stake ones, and that level of controversy. And so I would say that HQ2 definitely had the most ink spilled, virtual or otherwise. And so that is where we saw the most activity, because that was a global conversation. It wasn't just about U.S. real estate development. It was a lot bigger than that. And that's definitely where we saw just the most action. And kind of with that, I don't know if the proportion or the numbers changed it, but even if it was relative, there's just so much more at stake, I think, politically and anecdotally and culturally and ideologically and all these things. It was such a big story. So we did see the most there. And in terms of the project selection, I think Justin alluded to before, but we kind of we did a search and then narrowed it down by different sizes, different parts of the country. And for specifics around methods or anything, I'll add, and you can email one of us, and we're happy to share materials. And then I had that one. So yeah, Justin made practical examples around how communities, developers, and local organizations would create or use bots outside of university to support projects or positions.
Yeah, I mean, so one of the things that we definitely grappled with in the this project and the ones that preceded it was the ethical implications of using bots. And so, I think that if being very explicit about this is like not a human, then yeah, these AI powered bot can be really helpful in trying to communicate with the public about the goals of a project. So literally creating an urbanist UMA like what we did, whether it's for, maybe you do it for Facebook or Meta, or you do it for Reddit. You're essentially creating a mechanism to be able to communicate what some of the benefits of a project might be. So that would be I think a really good use.
Yeah. Armin is asking if we had any observations of AI or large language model hallucinations. So in terms of fabricated or nonsensical statements about the project in the discussions, I can start by saying there were definitely lots of nonsensical. In terms of fabricated specifically about a project, I don't think we saw too much of that. Like someone like, outright saying something untrue about a project. There was obviously, I guess, you can imagine when we're downloading and getting all this information, a lot of things that had nothing to do with it at all. Or sometimes it's kind of fun. We kind of joke. There was one of Urban and Ubunist's followers. Their location was Bikini Bottom from SpongeBob SquarePants. So we saw some funny things in there. Justin, can you think of any others in terms of statements that were about a project that were particularly fabricated or nonsensical?
Yeah, I mean, I think the nonsensical was something we saw over and over again.
Yeah.
But in that vein, though, I think it's useful just emphasizing that we came at this with this hypothesis that these bots were all going to be against the project. We're all going to be really negative. Um, and it turns out that that wasn't really the case. That we found a lot of bot activity, but a lot of it was kind of neutral.
Yeah.
I mean, some stuff that's slightly positive. And so, it's complicated. And actually, in the literature, we've read some papers that a lot of bot activity that was happening has been happening around elections is the same thing. So there was a lot of kind of misinformation that was spreading through different types of bot accounts on Facebook. I know during previous presidential elections that some of it was being sponsored by Russia or North Korea. And it turns out that they weren't like specifically advocating for a candidate. It was really just to kind of throw off people. There was this kind of manipulation that was not necessarily to advocate for a candidate. And so we found the same thing that sometimes they were just trying to get you off topic, saying, this isn't a good thing. We shouldn't talk about this anymore. Like as opposed to saying, this is a great project or this is a terrible project. So it's kind of hard to get into the minds of these bots and what they're thinking, but it's definitely something there.
Yeah, I think yeah, like the kind of noise, right? Creating noise
No,
in conversation or pulling focus. I think one of them, I forget the specifics, but the architectural design they were suggesting looked like something, and so that started a little mini conversation around like kind of like architectural aesthetics, and so like that kind of pulled away from part of the conversation. I think that in the last bit that we did, I was talking about in terms of the bots on bots. I do think it's really interesting the thinking about chatbots like ChatGPT, Cloud Llama, whatever else. And so people are increasingly using these for opinion as well as fact, right? And so the what they're pulling in and where they pull from is another indirect strategy for people thinking about bots to be like, okay, if this appears enough, then that model might bring it in to the conversation. And I said they're not apolitical. And we saw some of them really selling it. Like it was really interesting to see. It said, oh, this is a great development. So if you just saw like, this coming up in your neighborhood and you typed it into Llama and it just told you all the benefits and that's it, you might leave with a certain opinion. So it is, I think, that extra step of like how the large language models are taking in the output of other bots and other models is actually kind of builds that echo chamber, can kind of push it one way or the other. So Justin, there's another question here from Astrid. So about bots being used by developers. So what do you think the ramifications of bots being used by developers would be?
Yeah, and so it's almost kind of the opposite question about, could this be something useful for public agencies? Yeah, I mean, it's clearly a potentially powerful weapon for private developers, though I think there's these serious ethical issues that we're trying to raise. And so I would hope that developers would be cautious about using bots like this in a way that disrupts public engagement in an unfair way, and to try to allow those conversations, those authentic conversations about the appropriateness or benefits of a particular development, let those happen without the interference of bots as much as possible. That would be my hope.
Great. So we have a comment from John. Said, for non-tech participants, can you suggest a source before I GTP as to elementally where and how bots are created and managed? So I guess the logistics behind, I guess speculation behind who might be doing it, I guess, and also just how it's done or how is it managed. Um, yeah.
You want me to answer
Yes, I do want you
that?
to.
Yeah, so in our previous reports to LEF, we did provide some elementary description of how we created Urbanizuma and how one might approach that, and that'll also be included in the new book. So I'd encourage you, if you remember, you should be able to access that through your membership portal, that report. I mean, it's increasingly easy to do this, and the availability of ChatGPT and these other tools are, you can essentially just have that spit out the code for you, and then it's a matter of setting up an account, and then you have to, with like something like Twitter, I know you just have to kind of go into the back end. And maybe hire a high school student to, to help you a little bit with how to insert the code, but that's all you're really doing. And so we were having 18-year-old computer science students, doing most of the heavy lifting. So it requires a little bit, but not too much. And I think that will start to change as the technology becomes more accessible.
Yeah, like, and then like the cat and mouse of as platforms update, and then that back and forth of like same as yeah, anything that if it's not wanted as it seemed, then there's always ways around it, but it's a continuing conversation or dialogue, I think, between the platform and users in terms of people who want to do this, but the people who are informed, I think it's getting just more. It's been accelerated in the sense of like it's more economical. It's getting easier from that sense, and which also just creates all kinds of other questions as well. That's the last of the questions we have for now.
Well, I will just add one thing, which is we didn't include it in the PowerPoint presentation, but one of the things that we wanted to do in this project was to understand from urban planners, what their thoughts were. And so we did administer surveys to planners in the United States and kind of asking them about their experience and their, engagement with bots. And so I raised that because for me it was actually really interesting because so many of the responses we got were from bots, as opposed to planners. And part of it was the way we kind of set it up. We wanted to provide a financial incentive for people to participate, and so they're basically just scammers who are out there, kind of trying to steal from us. But I found the whole thing pretty ironic because we're asking about bots, and like these bots are kind of are filling out our survey. So yeah, so I think that was something also that came up, that a lot of planners responded saying that they had seen examples of when they had administered surveys, bots getting in the way, and so making it harder for them to get representative samples for what they were looking at. But
Yeah, and I think so. There's a big question from Lori. In the future, will bots become more difficult to distinguish from humans? So I mean, I think yes and no. I say like in tone and all these things, but I think that I mean, there's a lot of people working in ways to distinguish it. And I said a comment, Justin, you made, I think on a separate topic, but maybe a year ago or so, is that there's a chance we look back at some of the earlier iterations or the current iterations of AI and this kind of generated kind of conversations. We might look back at it and it might be really easy to tell. We might be able to look back and say, okay, that clearly was something because we've all learned along with it. But it's I said it's a moving thing. So I think in some ways we'll see more distinguishing, harder to distinguish in some ways, and then also better tools and better, yeah, more demand for wanting to make that distinction. Yeah, Justin, if you have any comments on.
no, no, it's
And I did have a question for you, Justin, about your previous comment. I'm going to jump in myself. Is
good.
in terms of thinking about bots answering surveys and that, I had a question separately 2 days ago, just here on campus about using synthetic humans for so using and so this idea that in planning we might move towards being like it's too hard to get people to answer surveys. We don't want to spend the money for town halls or whatever else. And so people are
Don't do it,
writing,
Max.
writing papers and doing work using synthetic based on characteristics, and it's getting published and it's being used. So, do you have any comments on the
Yeah, no,
use of?
I'm not supportive of that, and I think about in a community, a city or town where they're trying to understand what people
Yeah,
think to say that, oh well, we'll just go to synthetic humans and ask
yeah,
them because it's easier.
yeah,
I mean, there's no way that you could do a good enough job of building that synthetic human to
yeah,
fairly. So yeah, and I know that's an increasing pattern in
yeah,
research. People,
yeah,
scholars are
yeah.
using the synthetic humans for study. And it's not that there's no room for it,
Of course not.
but no, I mean it's not something I'm super
Yeah,
excited.
yeah. The idea that that someone would say that it could be more objective. It's like, well, I mean, it always depends on the question, of course, but
Yeah.
so yeah, a nice, interesting, good one here is it ethical to make assumptions about whether public input is a bot or not? So trying to be fair about receiving all public input. So I mean, yeah, go ahead, just
Well, I was going to say, it just reminds me of, I teach classes and my students, they don't always submit their own work. Sometimes they just ask ChatGPT to write the paper for them. And so, is it fair for me to say to them, I don't think you wrote that paper. That's not really your paper. So yeah, I mean, I think it raises a similar question. And, um, if you can divine the providence of the message, and it turns out it's illegitimate, I think that's fair to discard it. I mentioned earlier about the survey that we did. So we had over 140 responses where the person who took the survey did not include an email address that was like a legitimate employer or organization that was affiliated with planning. So instead of just saying, "Oh well, I mean, it's probably a human," and then just incorporate it into our survey results, what we did is we emailed those people, and because they gave us another email address, almost always a Gmail account, and so we emailed them. We said the requirement to be part of the survey and to receive the compensation is you need to include an email from a legitimate organization related to urban planning. So please reply with that. Like I said, I sent out 143 of those messages to those people, and none of them, none of those 143 responded and said, "Oh, here's my actual, city of Boston planning dot gov or whatever." Um, None of them did. So I mean, I think to Mayu's point, I think it just means you have to maybe work a little bit harder. You can't just like say, oh, well, anything that comes in, we're just going to accept because today in 2026, you can't. I think it's just going to potentially really skew the input you get. So I think you need to go that extra step and say, okay, and now I need you to validate or verify that your identity in some sort of way.
yeah, and I mean I agree completely, and I would add that from my kind of rosy disposition, I think like building extra steps in or some kind of metrics in to get a bit clearer view can also be used in a positive way to build engagement. So we can think of it. There are ways to think of it punitively in terms of, oh, we want to stop people from doing this thing or else, or we can also think of like the kind of carrot part of it to be like, oh, it's important to keep these human connections, or like if there is a phone call involved, or if there's something, even that can get tricky too. But these ideas are like, oh, how do we build community through our engagement, and not just kind of accusing people or worrying about accusing people. If there's a good reason that helps build connection and build engagement and build insight, that also happens to check if it's a real person. Like that's the way I would lean when thinking about this. Is like how do we draw even more positive out of the process while also hopefully giving us some insight to who the people are. And so we have from Nick, based on this research, how are either of you planning on using bots in your own work? So I can, use no bots in my work. I like I like the struggle. I've never even predictive text. I don't use anything. And I mean, I check to make sure I know how I'm doing it. The bigger conversation is to me is like how are my students using it and making sure that within my research lab we have clarity around the use. I'm not opposed as a tool, as a research tool, but personally, I kind of like the slow and steady approach. Justin's probably a bit more fast than I am.
Well, so in my work, I've been really interested in how we can use blockchain technology in community engagement and AI and bots. I mean that's actually a really big part of it. It in many ways it kind of struggles a little bit to reconcile with what we were talking about here. But I did put a link in if anyone's interested in learning more. But what when we talk about like, oh, we're gonna do online community engagement around a planning theme, maybe not even real estate development, maybe a planning theme around water resources or historic preservation, whatever the engagement is about. Well, so how do you reach those people? How do you get them engaged? And if the community that's running this process feels like they really need to do stuff online, well, blockchain actually is a great way to be able to get input, to be able to keep it decentralized, keep it democratic, and to process it automatically to make it more useful. And so that automatic dimension to it, there's a role for AI and in something called smart contracts, which helps make sense of the community input that's coming in. So I've oh, you don't see the
You have to make it to everyone, I think.
oh, that's interesting.
I can redo it for you if you want.
Yeah, if you can,
What you're
thanks. Oh,
talking
I
about.
see what you did. I see what I did wrong. Yeah, so I'm just Max is gonna post it in for me. Um, but yeah, so we worked in this community north of Boston. They wanted to change their zoning regulations to make accessory dwelling units allowable by right. And they had gone to public meeting twice, which is like basically invite everyone in the community to a room and to vote on it. And it failed both times. And they wanted to try again. So they were at the end of the rope and they said, oh, well, maybe this will help. So it did. So we did this like, really different kind of engagement. And then next time went to the meeting, it passed. So it became law. So yeah, so thank you, Max, for reposting
No
that to
problem.
everyone, not just to you.
Yeah,
And yeah, so there is room, I believe, for this type of technology, the ability to be able to use these bots for productive purposes, and
absolutely.
that's one of them.
I think I'll add a plug-in for our colleague Ruth as well. So Ruth continues to work kind of around digital planning. So she earlier did things around like Pokemon Go and the potential for planning, and she's always interested in a lot of these elements of it. So one of the things she's done, I'll put the link in here for her, is that she has developed a small short training course. So she's been really interested in what training and education around practicing planners and kind of the new digital turns. And so. Yes, Justin's put in her profile, and so she's thinking a lot about practice and about the use of this, and said over in Wales, but I mean, she's Australian. She's done work in the U.S. and Canada and Europe, so she's very global. But she couldn't be here today. But if I'm sure she'd be happy to hear from you and to hear the stuff that they're doing there as well.
Well, let me suggest that this has been really great to get everyone's feedback, and we'd love to hear more. I think Max and I are happy to stay on until 1. So if anyone wants to continue to engage with us in the chat, we're happy to continue to do that. But if you have someplace better to go,
Yes.
please, sayonara. And thank you again, Jocelyn and Sheila,
Yes,
for helping
absolutely.
to host us. So, Max, I think you and I are supposed to just talk amongst ourselves at this
Yeah.
point.
Absolutely. Yeah. Well, often when I talk about this project, Justin, I kind of mention I think of it as its origin story. I don't know if you do, but because we were outside a restaurant in Kyoto, um, and we were
Yeah.
talking about Russians and the election and everything, just over 10 years ago, around 10 years ago or so. It's maybe 8 years, 9 years ago. And then kind of we were waiting for other people. We were on time and other people were late. And so we were waiting and we just thought, oh yeah, it went from elections and global and then to being like, well, why not in planning?
Yeah.
And it's funny these little moments that then can lead to
Here you
we
are.
didn't see this coming at the time, but yeah, I mean it's always interesting, the moments where those human interactions, let's say.
Ah! If I was just conversing with ChatGPT, this we never would have come up.
Exactly right. Yeah, it's the yeah the,
So I'm doing another one of these webinars Tuesday.
mm.
Tuesday. Um, so I'm gonna see if I can find the link. Oh, I did. I found it. If anyone really liked hanging out with me, at least, Max isn't going to be there, but everyone wants to go to another webinar. This one's about
Ooh,
space architecture. I mean, a lot of people have lunar fever right now. People are really excited about the
absolutely.
moon and settling on the moon. Well, what does architecture and urban planning have to do with the moon? Well, we talking about building a space base there, and then what about beyond that? Why not go into outer space or into the Mars? We got 22 people still floating around. They're probably just doing something else.
I know, right? But
They just
well,
have
since we're here, yeah, I'll plug my new book while we're here.
okay.
So I've been on the circuit as well for my book around play in later life. How do we think about age-friendly community planning and design beyond preventative measures? I think there's a real big opportunity to think, well, I mean, in general, also for our research, but about joy, human connection, social cohesion, in these fragmented times. There's a lot of room for play. So I've also been on the talk and webinar circuit for the last couple months. So it's
So you
always
could do a webinar right now in our last 9 minutes together, just on your book, right? Off the cuff.
well, there is. I mean, there is. I mean, it relates to so much. We're all aging, and we're all. It's nice to be playful. One thing that for the people who are, if anyone's still listening, but I've always loved about Justin's research is that it is playful at heart. I think it's curiosity and playful, and that kind of leads to those interesting, unexpected outcomes and projects and people. So even right now, I'm in Nashville right now. As here, I'm on sabbatical, so I'm at Vanderbilt, and I'm living in East Nashville, which is a very playful place. Thinking about how what people do with their houses in terms of stripes and crazy stuff. It's a really neat place to be thinking about play and community planning.
Um, Went to this really cool talk. This is not a webinar, if anyone's interested. This family, this was almost 100 years ago. The father of the family got a sabbatical. Instead of going to Nashville, they bought a Model T Ford and drove the entire, essentially circumference of the United States,
Wow.
18,000 miles.
I, that is amazing.
And he was a mathematician. So he took
Mhm.
like really copious notes about like all the miles they made and how much they spent and everything. And took photographs.
Yeah.
And the wife had a journal and she kept like notes about all the people they met all along the way. And it
I just
sounds
like
like
thinking about the state of the highways and the suspension in a Model
there
T.
were hardly even roads. Talking about highways, there weren't
I
really any
know.
roads in most
Yeah.
of these places.
Oh,
They talked about one was a sand road, which I don't think that's a thing. A sand road, if it's made of, if there's
it's
sand,
just not a road.
it's not a road.
That's amazing. Yeah, very different from our drive home. We're about to drive home, and so our daughter will definitely she'll have as much tablet as she wants during a drive, and so yeah, very different. Fast forward 100 years. That's wild.
And yeah, some of the crazy things like there were no road signs. I mean, let alone
Yeah,
roads, but I mean, there were no signs. Like so, you could just be, driving around, make a left, make a right. I mean, they had maps, but
but
they're
still,
good.
even the picture is amazing. Oh, even to like manage gas and I mean, food. I mean, yeah, it's one of those things as you think about it, it just kind of evolves the questions. Wow.
Yeah, no cell phones, of
No,
course,
of course
right?
not. This is Wow. So,
But I
so
mean,
it's like
I'm gonna do that for my next sabbatical. That's my plan. No, I'm just kidding.
yeah, wow. Yeah, and drive. I mean, yeah, we traveled a lot, but we traveled more comfortably than that. But the spirit of adventure is okay.
Well, we could probably sign off at this point, but really,
I expect so, yeah.
thanks for joining, Max. This has been
Yeah, thank
great.
you. It's always nice to chat. And, one more.
Thank you,
And thanks, Jocelyn and Sheila. Thanks
everyone.
again.
Thank you to both of you. It was a great webinar, and I loved the discussion. So for everyone else signing on, that's still hanging on, I think we'll just close this webinar out.
Okay.